The millionaire single father stood speechless as the waitress taught his disabled son to program a health tracking app, never imagining that this creation would save millions of lives and spread hope around the globe. Hello, my wonderful audience. Get ready for a story that will move your heart. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're drawn into this journey, and leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's amazing to see people from all over the world joining us today. Alexander Reed, a name once celebrated in tech circles as the epitome of intellect and grit, now sits silently in a small diner tucked away in Silicon Valley. In stark contrast to the hustle of what was once the epicenter of programming power, he feels adrift not because of numbers or algorithms, but because of something far more complex: his son Dylan. 12 years old, frail, and confined to a wheelchair, Dylan sits quietly, his face betraying little emotion, yet those eyes gleam with a strange intensity, as though harboring an entire galaxy of mysteries that Alexander, who once designed the most sophisticated AI systems, cannot decipher. Over the years, Alexander built and sold millions worth of software. He can spot a system vulnerability from a few lines of log, devise a server recovery strategy in minutes, while an engineering team panics. But with Dylan, he is simply a helpless father, helpless, watching his son unable to run or play, helpless as the boy communicates only through cold lines of code. Dylan sits, as though by instinct, finger dancing across his phone's screen, chasing a private stream of thought. The space between father and son feels sealed off by an invisible wall Alexander has never learned to breach. Just then, Alexander lowers his head to read the menu, an ordinary act, laden with quiet anxiety, when his son's small hand begins typing faster. Code lines appear in rapid succession. Alexander glances over, his eyes narrowing for a moment. Is accustomed to Dylan coding as a second language, but this is different. The structure, the function calls. It isn't one of Dylan's aimless scripts. This is something purposeful. A health tracking function? Alexander reads silently. The code outlines a real-time heart rate, blood pressure, and neurological response monitoring system. It's a sophisticated data processing mechanism, yet suffused with the purity of a child striving to protect something dear. At that moment, Serena Cole approaches, a waitress with her hair neatly pinned and a gentle smile, someone easily overlooked, but possessing an undeniable presence. When her eyes fall on Dylan's phone screen, her whole frame freezes. "This is," she murmurs, eyes wide, as if confronting a ghost from her past. Alexander looks up and sees the change in Serena's gaze. He notices her hand tremble as it hovers over the running code. In that instant, two worlds that seemed unrelated, a prodigious young programmer and a waitress with an obscure background, suddenly connect through a language only those who have faced life-and-death lines could comprehend. "You recognize this?" Alexander asks quietly, his voice betraying excitement. Serena doesn't answer immediately. She stares at the code, then softly says, "I once dreamed of building such a system when my mother suffered from chronic heart failure. But I never wrote it down. Only sketched a few ideas, then abandoned it for lack of skill. I never told anyone." Alexander feels his heart pound, not because of the code itself, but because of an unfamiliar sensation in years, realizing everything funnels to a single nexus. His silent son and this Womantwo people he once saw as passing figures may be the final pieces in a project on the brink of collapse. No one speaks further. Only the steady tapping of Dylan's keyboard remains, slow and profound like a heartbeat. Alexander knows a door has just opened. What lies beyond it, he cannot yet dare to imagine. The obsession with Dylan's code replayed in Alexander's mind like an unfinished melody. The lines his son wrote were more than pure logic. They hinted at something deeper, an emotion, a memory, perhaps even a piece of a soul long suppressed. What gripped Alexander most was Serena's unexpected reaction, this waitress, who seemed to drift through his life like a shadow. He needed to know who she really was. His instincts told him nothing here was random anymore. The next morning, Alexander returned to the diner alone, leaving Dylan at home. He took the window seat in a hushed, misty dawn. While Serena was busy in the kitchen, he quietly beckoned the manager over and, in just the right mix of discretion and concern, asked about her. The manager, an older woman who had watched Serena work silently for nearly 3 years, sighed before replying. Serena was an outstanding computer science student at UC Berkeley. As a freshman, she placed second in the national programming competition. She surprised everyone with a promising health tracking app. Then, in her second year, she dropped out. No one knows exactly why. All we heard was that her brother died of end-stage heart disease. After that, Serena closed herself off, as if all her inner light had been extinguished. Alexander sat there, stunned. He couldn't say how long he'd been there. Later, he furtively watched Serena carry a tray of pastries to another table, her worn white apron hiding her slender frame, and realized her gentle eyes held a sorrow he now understood all too well. That afternoon, as the diner emptied, Alexander hesitated before approaching the drink washing station where Serena was rinsing glasses. He didn't want to pry into her past, yet he couldn't ignore her talent slipping away. "Serena," he said softly, voice like a breeze, "about that code yesterday, I believe Dylan was continuing an idea you began a long time ago." She paused, a single heartbeat's worth but significant. Then, without a word, she slipped behind a small door at the counter and beckoned him to follow. On a dusty wooden shelf lay an old backpack. Serena unlocked it and pulled out a notebook. The cover was frayed, the pages yellowed. She flipped to a well-worn page dotted with pencil smudges and handwritten notes. Measure resting heart rate. Connect respiratory sensor. Detect abnormalities via self-learning AI. Alexander felt his breath catch. The logic structure. The architecture of the concept. This was the precursor to the code Dylan had spontaneously written, uncannily precise. It was as if an invisible thread bound two distant souls across time and pain. "You meant to build this app?" Alexander asked quietly. Serena didn't look up, but nodded. "When my brother's condition worsened, I didn't know how to help him. I tried creating something to monitor him remotely, but I wasn't skilled enough. Or I didn't have enough time. He died. And I couldn't touch the code again. Every time I opened my laptop, I'd hear his weak breathing on that final night." Alexander was silent. The pain in her voice needed no further words. It was enough to squeeze his heart. "But Dylan," Serena hesitated. "That boy, it's as if he's finishing what I left undone. I never believed in fate, but something, between him and my old sketches, I can't explain it." For the first time, she met his gaze. "If I can help, not for the app, not for you, but for Dylan, I think he's calling me, in some way." Alexander managed a small, bittersweet smile. In his haunted eyes, there was relief for the first time in years. And so, a dream once shattered began to be reborn from an old notebook page, a withdrawn child, and a man who thought he'd lost all ability to connect with the world. Alexander's lab was not like any other tech office in Silicon Valley, not because of curved monitors or wall-embedded servers, but because of a small, quiet corner by the window reserved for Dylan. There stood a painted white wooden desk, a few sheets of notes, an electronic codeboard tilted for the boy's ease, and a custom tablet Alexander had designed to suit his son's limited movements. That afternoon, Serena stepped into the lab, the late sun filtering in like gossamer. She carried only a small canvas bag and a hesitant look in her eyes. But when she saw Dylan seated there, his fingers moving slowly over the touch keyboard, her expression shifted steadily, silently, as if everything in her had fallen into place. Alexander quietly introduced them, then backed away. He knew this time he was not the guide. Serena sat beside Dylan and spoke little. She neither forced him to look at her nor ask direct questions. Instead, she pulled out a scrap of paper, jotted a few lines of simple code, and laid it gently on the desk. She typed in a variable, then looked at Dylan as if asking him a question in his own silent language. Dylan glanced over, hesitated for a moment, then. Another line of code appeared on the screen. Serena gave a small nod, and for the first time that day, a smile dawned on the boy's face. No one spoke. Yet between these two, one, a programmer who had lost all faith, the other a boy, imprisoned by silence, a dialogue had begun, through code, through patience, through a gentle bond that needed no words. With each session, Serena never taught Dylan in the usual way. She did not lecture. She sparked curiosity with open-ended questions, simple health charts, by letting him discover solutions rather than leading him there. She encouraged trial, error, and correction. Each time Dylan wrote a new function, she tapped the desk as though comforting a child taking its first steps. Then, the miracle happened. A health tracking app began to take shape, streamlined, intuitive, capable of measuring and storing heart rate, blood pressure, respiration rate, and crucially, of issuing early warnings when readings shifted abnormally. Dylan did more than code. He designed. He refined the interface for users with disabilities. He even commented his code something he'd never done before. One afternoon, golden light slanted across the keyboard as Serena watched Dylan's test cases. Abruptly, she froze. She realized that this structure, if integrated with the patient database Alexander had been experimenting on, could unlock a completely new solution for chronic disease monitoring at community scale. She turned to Alexander, her voice soft but sure. The project you've been struggling with might not need rewriting from scratch. Dylan's just written exactly what you need. We only need a bridge code and to separate the AI layer. Alexander looked at her, then at his son. Dylan continued typing, unaware he had just crafted a major breakthrough. In that moment, something within Alexander softened. He stepped back out of the room, standing in the hall behind the glass. Through the partition, he watched his son converse for the first time without words. And Serenache hadn't just helped refine an app. She had seen Dylan as Alexander always wished others would see him, not as a disabled child, but as an untapped mind waiting to be decoded. Emotion welled in Alexander's chest: pride, regret, gratitude. All these years as a father, he'd tried every method to help his son step into the world. He'd never found anyone who could help him step truly into another person's heart. Serena had done just that, with patience, with empathy, and with a private pain she had once wrapped in silence. Alexander closed his eyes. The door to the future he'd thought shut tight was now swinging open, and for the first time in years he wasn't walking it alone. Beloved audience, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for what happens next. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story, so we know you're still here. Alexander had never imagined someone like Serena could enter his world so naturally. First came curiosity, then admiration and, now, a vague yet intense feeling he dared not name. Every time Serena appeared in the lab, the atmosphere softened. Not because she could tame stubborn lines of code, but because she brought Dylan to life, as if the boy's inner light only ignited when she was near. During the tensest days when Alexander's software company was on the brink of a hostile takeover, investors were calling non-stop, and budget spreadsheets lay in chaos, the lab became the only place he could breathe. There, amid the soft glow and Dylan's keystrokes, he glimpsed a fragile, yet tangible future. One evening, after the entire office had gone quiet, only the three of them remained in the lab, working to debug a stubborn code. Dylan pursed his lips and typed slowly, determination in his eyes. Serena leaned in, whispering a hint. Alexander sat opposite, but his mind drifted beyond the codato, the gentleness in her gaze. After 3 hours of struggle, the application finally ran smoothly. The screen displayed a user-friendly interface, with real-time health charts. Dylan smiled, a rare, wordless smile that seemed to brighten the entire room. Serena looked at him, then at Alexander. Her voice was slow but clear. This app could save your company. If you integrate it into the platform you're developing, you'll rescue your medical project and prove a new direction. But you must decide quickly before investors pull out. Alexander fell silent. His heart tightened. The idea was brilliant, truly groundbreaking. But what if it failed? If Dylan saw the app he'd built buried by cutthroat business, would the boy ever dare code again? He feared not losing money but hurting his son. I'm afraid, Alexander admitted his first words in years void of any confident veneer. If it fails, Dylan will think it's his fault. Serena said nothing, only met his eyes. There was no reproach, no demandingly quiet trust and unwavering resolve. In that look, Alexander realized he was the one limiting his son's future with his own fear. At last, he nodded. We'll do it. He reached out to thank her. Serena gently placed her hand over his. In that moment, silence stretched between them. No keystrokes, no analytical thoughts, just time pausing in the whirlwind of life. Alexander bowed his head, and pressed his lips lightly to hers. A gentle kiss, neither rushed nor calculated, simply an outpouring of long-suppressed emotion. But Serena pulled away. Her voice caught in her throat, not loud, but enough to still Alexander. "I can't let myself fail again." She drew back and hurried out of the lab, leaving Alexander standing there, heart adrift between unspoken truths. And Dylan, still at the keyboard, watched Serena's every move, as if sensing everything. From that day on, Dylan stopped writing code. He still came to the lab, but his eyes no longer sparkled, his fingers no longer tapped out passionate lines. Alexander tried to encourage him, suggesting ideas, but everything fell into silence. Not because Dylan was angry, but because a piece of his world was gone. The one person who truly heard the silent language he struggled to express. Alexander realized Serena was not only the bridge between technology and emotion, between dreams and reality, but the very light guiding Dylan forward. To lose her was like losing his compass on the journey to reclaim a dream. For the first time, Alexander understood. Protecting Dylan isn't about keeping him in a safe shell, but bringing that light back to him. Even if it means confronting the past, risking everything with his heart. Alexander had never believed in second chances until he lost Serena. From the day she left the lab, the once hopeful air fell silent. Dylan stopped writing code. The boy would sit motionless for hours, hands hovering over the keyboard but not striking a single key. Watching his son, Alexander felt his heart lacerate. He realized he had extinguished that light himself with an ill-timed kiss, with unspoken expectations. But he knew if he did nothing, he would lose not only Serena but Dylan as well, once more. So one gray morning, Alexander made the decision his pride had always barred him from. He brought Dylan back to the old diner, the place where it all began. The café was unchanged. The aroma of fresh roasted coffee, the clatter of plates, the murmur of young programmers debating AI and startups. And there, in the dim light, Alexander spotted Serena still clearing tables, hair hastily tied, her eyes weary from months on the run. Serena looked up, and everything seemed to freeze. She paused, eyes meeting Dylan. She sat silently, holding up his phone toward her. On the screen was a new interface, an updated version of their health, tracking apps sleeker, smarter, and, in the description below, rewritten for you. Her hand trembled. The world shifted for her not because of the code, but because of how the boy entrusted it to her, wordless, unpleading, forging a silent bond strong enough to shatter every defense. Just then, Alexander's phone rang. He opened the message and quietly showed Serena the screen. An email from the organizers of Silicon Valley's premier tech conference. Dylan's app had been selected for an official demonstration before the top investors. "They need you," Alexander said, not in the tone of a businessman, but of a desperate father clinging to the last thread of hope. Serena bowed her head, hands clutching the tablecloth. Inside her, two forces warred, the fear of failure and the memory of her brother gone between unfinished lines of code. But then, she looked at Dylan. He said nothing, only gazed at her with expectant eyes as if entrusting her with the world in that moment. Serena nodded softly, but resolutely. At the tech gala, the atmosphere was electric. Leading investors, CEOs, reporters, and media all gathered. One dazzling product after another graced the stage, yet nothing stilled the audience like Dylan's appearance. He rolled forward in his wheelchair, beside Serena in her simple shirt, a microphone in hand. She began in a measured, conversational voice, not a sales pitch. She spoke of Dylan and of an app born from real constraints, illness, fear, and a silent bond between father and son. She didn't drown listeners in jargon. Instead, she described how a child chose code as his voice and a dream, the three of them each with their own scar shad stitched together. As slides showed the app's features, heart rate detection, early heart failure alerts, automatic doctor alerts, the hall fell into hushed awe. Then, like a rising tide, applause and cheers erupted, flashes strobed wildly. Within an hour, 3 venture funds had offered a multi-million-dollar investment. It was clear. This wasn't just an app. It was a humanitarian statement in a harsh tech world. Amid the chaos, Alexander stood quietly. He wasn't focused on the numbers. His eyes stayed on Serena, who dabbed tears and smiled at Dylan. A smile no longer hidden, no longer fearful. He approached her, no microphone needed, and whispered so only she could hear. "You didn't just save this company, you saved our future." Serena turned to him. For the first time, she did not step back. Tears fell, but no longer from fear instead, from release and acceptance. She understood that passion wouldn't harm, her avoiding it was what had withered her away, and Dylan never uttering a single word had taught her to begin again. Alexander stood motionless in the lab that had witnessed both breakdowns and renewals. The lingering scent of coffee still clung to the table, but everything inside him had changed. Gone were the sleepless nights spent alone, frantically debugging code, the vacant stare of Dylan when Serena walked away, and the suffocating silence of a father who had no way to reach his son's world. Before him, Dylan sat quietly in his wheelchair, small hands resting on a custom keyboard, a gift he had assembled himself, tweaking the hardware to suit Serena's typing style. No one spoke of it, but Alexander knew. That gift was Dylan's silent thank you, and his way of saying he wanted Serena to stay not just in the project, but in their lives. Serena stood beside Dylan, no longer wearing her faded white apron. The soft-colored suit she now wore highlighted the quiet confidence in her. Her eyes were no longer fearful. They shone with the special light of someone who had walked through darkness and chosen to stand tall. Alexander looked at them both, overwhelmed by an emotion he'd never named before. Gratitude, respect, affection, connection beyond words. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small metal Tokena round badge engraved at its center with a short snippet of code, the first lines Dylan had ever written back in that little diner, when the boy spoke only through his keystrokes. He approached Serena, and his voice huskier than before said, "Together, we'll spread Dylan's creation far and wide, not just to save a company, but to change how people view healthcare, how they see disabled children, and the power of an idea born from love." Serena looked at the badge, her hand trembling slightly as she took it. 1,000 memories flooded her of her unfinished dreams, of unhealed wounds, and of the journey from fear to that moment of standing in a tech conference and making the world listen to a child who never spoke a word. She nodded and pinned the badge to her lapel. No further words were needed. In that simple gesture lay her silent vow never to turn away again. They went on to found Dylan's Codea Technology and Healthcare Fund, dedicated to life-saving projects sparked by overlooked individuals and unheard ideas. Serena became creative director. Alexander took charge of strategic operations, and Delantha, once silent boy, became their youngest technology advisor, not by delivering speeches, but by writing meaningful code. Their first application was adopted in over 200 hospitals across the United States, detecting thousands of early-stage heart failure cases among seniors and chronic patients. Global health organizations reached out to partner. Countless young people from high schools to tech universities wrote to Dylan's code, sharing that they'd regained faith in innovation and believed they, too, could change the world with their own lines of code. And every day, Dylan still sat in the lab. He never spoke, but his eyes always lit up whenever Serena entered. On his screen, new lines of code continued to appear, refined, seamless, and full of heart. Without a single word, Dylan was coding the future. Alexander stood behind them, watching Serena, her gaze unwavering in Dylan, whose hands were weaving a better world. He realized they were no longer 3 isolated individuals bound by an app. They were a team, a living testament that creativity, when nurtured by love and understanding, can save lives. And the deepest lesson of all, taught by Dylan though he never uttered a word, was this: every child carries within them an idea capable of changing the world. All they need is someone willing to listen. The story isn't over yet. Every new line of code Dylan writes isn't just a feature. It's a brand new chapter written from the heart. Sometimes, true wonder doesn't spring from grand inventions or the most brilliant minds, but from quiet perseverance in a child who chooses silence yet never stops coding their dreams. Dylan's code is more than an app. It's a symbol of faith, that every person, even wounded, can inspire others, that love done right can awaken the dormant genius within silent hearts. This story isn't just for tech enthusiasts, but for anyone who has ever feared failure, lost their passion, or felt unimportant. Remember, light often comes from the least expected places, and each line of code, each small act, can be the beginning of a chapter of renewal, Thank you for staying with us until the end. If something resonated with you, please leave a comment, share the video, and subscribe to help spread more healing and inspiring stories. We'll meet again where heart and technology together create miracles.